Arun Goyal, Principal Secretary, Power. So I don't know, 5 minutes, what you can say really.
Hello. Thank you, sir. Uh, it's always pleasure to be in such a forum and discuss particularly about distribution. Uh, Briefly, I have a sort of a unique experience of working in Delhi's power sector on three occasions. First was like when it was totally unbundled, it was Delhi Vidyut Board, and thereafter, immediately after it was privatized, and after Electricity Act 2003, whose architect, Ajay Shankar is over here, uh, and then more recently, but for a very brief period, for around 6 months. Of course, I had a prepared presentation, but due to the limitations of the time, so I would be very brief and try to touch upon very salient features and which I personally think are really important from the distribution point of view. You see, for proper functioning of any power system, the general parameter is that the investment into the sector should be in ratio of 2 in generation, then 1 part into transmission and another 2 part in distribution. But of the three, distribution is the most important because it is what brings cash to the system. And for any system to be viable, you need to have cash. And what we call is that, it's a cash register for the sector. And also that the one sector, which has been already mentioned, very, very politically sensitive because it's where you have a direct interface with the consumers. Now, if we totally look at a very, very macro picture, it's very, very disturbing. You see, for the sector, for the distribution sector itself, since 2005-6, the losses were roughly around 10,000 crores, which have increased to nearly 70,000 crores in the year 2012-13. So if you look for the March 2013, for which the figures are available, the cumulative losses for the sector are roughly 2,50,000 crores, and the borrowings are nearly more than 3 lakh crores. So you see, the figures are so mind-boggling that, we need to make the sector viable and something needs to be done. Uh, like, despite, Electricity Act 2003, which was really, very, very futuristic, and a lot of improvements have taken place since then, but still the situation remains is that the distribution losses are pretty high, and particularly the infrastructure at the distribution level in many states is pretty bad, which needs for improvement on a massive scale. Now, coming to one thing which I really want to highlight is, if you look at the number of units that we sell every year in the sector, so it's roughly around 1,000 billion units, roughly say 1 trillion units. If you put in terms of 1 lakh, it comes to 1 lakh crore units that are sold. Now it's a little more than that, but I always take that figure to bring home the point. Now you see the average cost of supply was roughly 5 rupees. I'm talking of the year 2012-13, so these are for all details are available. And whereas the average revenue realized was 4.19. So for the country as a whole, for every unit that was being sold, we were making a loss of 83 paisa. Now just come to think, when you convert it into 1 lakh crore units, it comes to 83,000 crores. So that is why when I said that the sector is incurring a loss of roughly 70,000 crores, it is essentially because on every unit you are incurring a loss of around 83 paisa. And then, there are other issues like, agriculture sector, where you sell around 23% of the energy, but the realization is only 8% of the revenues. Now, what has this led to is that the buildup of the regulatory assets in the system. If you look at the accumulated regulatory assets, they are nearly 70,000 crores, maybe a little more now. And the customers, the consumers have to serve an accumulated, annual interest cost of nearly 10,000 crores every year just because of the regulatory asset, because as you people are in the power sector, the regulatory assets are getting built up because whatever expenses are there not are getting passed on to the tariff on a regular basis. Now, again, in this, if we look at it, the losses, which still are nearly around 26 to 27%. Now, if you look again at, say, 1 lakh crore units, just imagine the sensitivity. say the 10 paisa increase per unit in the tariff brings about 10,000 crores into the system. And then again, because you see 1 lakh crore into 10 paisa, so it's a very simple mathematics, 10,000 crores that come into the system. If you look at other way, like if you are able to reduce your losses by 1%, it really brings about around 6 to 7 crore, 6 to 7,000 crore rupees into the system. And the other very important issue is that, I mean, why the sector has to be sustainable. You see, we all talk about reliable power, 24/7 power, but you see, for that kind of a system to be there, we really have to invest into the sector, we really have to invest into the infrastructure. I always give this instance, like recently I had my tenure as a Minister Economic and Commercial in Tokyo. At that time, tsunami came over there. You see, at that time, they were running 55 nuclear plants. And at a drop of the hat, all these 55 nuclear plants were shut down. And these 55 nuclear plants were contributing roughly 33% of Japan's power. But after they shut down the plants, within, I am telling you, within 2 to 3 days, the whole system, they were able to normalize. So what I'm trying to highlight is that that is the kind of backup, I mean, redundancy that they have built into the system, that even after such a massive earthquake, tsunami, where 33% of the power was shut down at one point itself, but still the system was to sustain. So that is how, like, we have to invest in the infrastructure, and that is how the redundancy has to be created. Now, if you want to invest into the system, I mean, someone has to pay for it. It's either the taxpayer's money or it's from the consumer through the tariff. Now, the taxpayer money also comes from the consumer, of course, from a particular set of consumer, not from everyone. On the other hand, consumer, I mean, the tariff also is subsidized, cross-subsidized to the some extent. So I think this issue is very important, that in case we want to have redundancy into a system, we talk about N-1, developed countries are working at N-2. I mean, all this and investing into infrastructure, particularly distribution infrastructure, is pretty expensive. So this is like, I think I would not like to take more time. I mean, there are other issues which can be discussed at length. I have a detailed presentation. But I mean, my simple point is this. I mean, if you want 24/7 reliable power, you have to invest into the infrastructure. And the other issue is that, like, as a government servant, if my salary over the last 7-8 years has more than doubled, I think some share of it has to go to the power sector also. So some increase and all is to be there. Of course, I'm not saying that, I mean, there has to not to be any control over it. But whatever, I mean, increase has to be there, that has to take into consideration that the huge investments are required into the sector in case we want 24/7 and reliable power supply. I have a, I mean, host list of, say, I mean, solutions and all, whatever, but essentially, I mean, one issue which is very important, which has always been, I mean, came over there, is that when we talk about regulators, I think even though the whole main salient feature of the Electricity Act 2003 was to run the sector on the commercial lines, to take, say, tariff setting mechanism out of the government in the hands of the regulator, so that they could work independently after taking everything into consideration. So I think that is also a very, very important issue on the both aspects, that the capacity has to be built for the regulators as well as the staff which is working in the regulatory authorities, and then the government interference has to be least so that the sector can run on a commercial lines, and India, when we are aspiring to be a developed country and hope for 24/7 uninterrupted power supply, are able to build enough redundancies. Thank you very much.